Okay, so we're now set up for our first talk of today, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Carolyn Graves-Brown, who many of you will know, both online as well as here in person. Carolyn was the first curator of the Egypt Centre collection, arrived here in 1997, just a few months or so before the museum opened, and had a frantic time trying to get everything together in order to open to the public. So Carolyn is going to be presenting some of the hopes, imaginations and dreams that were initially kind of thought about with the Egypt Centre, even before it opened to the public, but more so after it opened to the public. So we're very grateful to have you here, Carolyn, and to come back to Swansea or back to the Egypt Centre and to tell us all about your early days of the museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, for that nice introduction. I'm aware that sometimes I go over time, so I will keep an eye on the time. So this picture starts off with the opening of the Egypt Centre in September 1998. And Wendy and I had been there about a year previously setting things up. And some people in this group here had been there even longer. We all had different hopes and dreams. The people in this group, some people saw one vision of the Egypt Centre of the future, other people had another idea. So, of course, because of that, and because as well, my job description was quite vague, it sort of said to run the Egypt Centre, it meant that there was a certain amount of conflict between what I saw how the Egypt Centre should go and maybe what some of the people, not necessarily all of them in the picture, what they thought it should be like. And this sort of continued very much in the early days. This talk is very much a personal account. You could say it's about what I dreamed the Egypt Centre would be about. And I know that it doesn't cover everything. It's only a small selection of the things that we did, hoped, etc. So in 1998, I would say that there were two main ways in which the museum might have gone. And I'm not going to say which was right or which was wrong. The other way, the typical university museum would have its advantages, but I'm not going to go over them. But what we actually did was a little bit atypical of a university museum. It was in those days, but now a lot of what we did then has become mainstream. What I think I should explain here a little bit more about what I mean by a typical university museum. In 1998, I'm not necessarily saying now, remember. Well, I came from a local authority museum background, so that was very much in the service ethos, trying to get as many people as possible involved. It was all about community involvement, and often we came under leisure and tourism and such like. So it was a little bit different, and I'd done the Museums Association diploma and all the rest of it. So I had a certain mindset, that's what I'm trying to say, about what a museum should be about, what it should do. But a university museum, now I found out very quickly that university museums thought, some people who worked in university museums, not everybody, this is a characterization. Some people thought that they were elite because they worked in a university museum, but the local authority museums thought they were not exactly the scum of the earth, but very much ivory tower. And they imagined a university museum as being a place which wasn't not accredited, which is a standard that museums have to go through to show that they're good enough for museums. In fact, when I went along to local authority meetings, one of the first things people often used to say is, "Are you a real accredited museum?" And I'd say yes, and this was quite surprising for them. University museums, as somebody else said, not me, were considered very often to be drawers full of bones and bits of pottery that had been got together by long dead professors, and nobody really knew what was there. And there might be a curator who was a part-time person who'd be an academic, and of course they didn't have the time to spend just looking after the collection, even if they wanted to. It was very much something that they did for free. So there was a big difference, and I think more so then than there is now. However, as I said, we went along the alternative ethos that I'm going to explain a little bit more about. And in many ways, we were very successful. I'd say so much so that by 2003, we were invited to a special meeting of the University Museums Group. There were a few select people gathered from university museums in 2003, and we went along to the University of East Anglia and we had a big meeting about how university museums should go, etc. And this was published about the same time, just to try and explain what the background was. This was an article written in the Museums Association Journal by somebody from Cambridge. And you can see that this was written by somebody from a local authority museum, not me, it wasn't me, somebody else wrote that. And the person who wrote this article here, Ivory Towers, David Phillipson, I thought he made some very good points about why university museums should not be like local authority museums and why they should be different and why maybe they should be a little bit elitist on Ivory Towers. I could understand some of those points, but this came out at about the same time as we were having this meeting, and I actually had people coming up to me in the meeting from Cambridge University Museum saying, "We're not all like David, we're not all like him." So things were already changing then. So this is what we weren't. In a way, our ethos, this alternative ethos that I was explaining about, and dreams, could really be boiled down a lot to what universities call widening participation. We didn't call it widening participation in those days, but that's what it tends to be called now. It was all about reaching the difficult to reach, basically, because that's the way that we'd been brought up in local authority museums. They're brought up because right from the start, I worked in museums. This was all not just certain classes, not just religions, not all sorts of different interests, so very much interdisciplinary, so not just Egyptology, all generations and all abilities, not quite like Cambridge. I went along to a talk. I'm sorry to pick on Cambridge. Cambridge does some absolutely wonderful things. They really do. They did then and they still do. But I did go along to a university museum talk later. And we were discussing about how we integrated the public into the museums. And somebody from Cambridge said, "Oh, we do that as well. We have our MA students act as guides to show the public around." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. We do that sort of thing. We also have non-MA students. How do you train them?" And I was really interested in how they operated compared to how we did. We don't need to train them. They're MA students. And like I said, it was very different. They didn't understand that working in a museum is slightly different from perhaps knowing all the academic stuff about artifacts. And widening participation as well, we thought of in the Egypt Centre as not just something that you impose on people, but it's a two-way thing that you also gain from them. Really participating. And this is something we did right from the beginning and something that you're going to hear more about later as well, not just from me. It's something that we received a lot of criticism for, but it's now held up as good practice. Wendy's going to talk about education and Sid is going to talk about volunteers, but it actually features in all that we did, or at least we tried to feature it in all that we did, even international academic conferences, such as this one here, Sex and Gender in Ancient Egypt. We did decide, or chose this title deliberately for a populist reason, to try and get other people in, other disciplines, and, well, anybody that was basically interested. I'll pass over the details of the conflict that we had when we did this conference. But basically, what it was is, because we tried to get the public in, and also, terrible thing we did here, we allowed a slightly alternative Egyptologist to speak. We came in for a lot of criticism, and for a while we were banned from doing conferences. But anyway, that was it. The resulting book, however, was very much in the mainstream. So the academics did actually get, well, I believe that they did. They might disagree, because I said we were banned. So I can say what I want now, you see. Leave can't sack me. We also had lots of special events for the public. And I'm just going to skate over these because some of them you're going to hear later. We had child volunteers, and we still have child volunteers, special needs volunteers, volunteers who are long-term unemployed. And yes, we did have those students, but we did train them. We also did things like the Nile Cycle Challenge, and on this also came in for criticism as well. We raised money for an orphanage in Egypt because we were trying to give back to the originating community and also for our volunteers. And we were supported in it by Sybil Crouch. There's Sybil. Sybil Crouch, who was my line manager, and also Taliesin staff. And also we had Gary Astley, who was then the finance department person in the university. So we did, I'm not saying we didn't have any support, we did have some support. It's just that it wasn't sort of across the board. For the Egypt Centre as well, in 1998, we decided that anybody could publish anything about the collection, which was a little bit controversial at the time. So, for example, I did my PhD when I was at Swansea. I didn't do it at Swansea, I actually did it at UCL. But the reason why I did it was because I was trying to show I was one of you, those of you who are academics, to try and make me more accepted. I'm not sure it really worked. But anyway, while I was doing it, I was looking, it was all about lithics, flints in ancient Egypt. And I was looking at different collections and going around the UK looking at different collections of flints. And there was one museum who I won't name. I looked up online and how to contact them to look at their collection. And it said, we welcome people with academic specialities. And I was terrified. I thought, well, have I got an academic specialty? Here was me doing a PhD, and I was worried that they might not want to get the objects out for me. It was off-putting. And we didn't want the Egypt Centre to be like that. So we said anybody can publish things in the Egypt Centre. Anybody. They can write a load of rubbish. Doesn't mean it's what we are saying, but it's okay for other people to come and look at the collection, as long as they don't damage it. And I could tell you some very funny stories of why people came to see the collection that we allowed that weren't academic at all. But anyway, that's by the by. And we give them as much information as possible. Our child volunteers wrote labels. We did put them in a different colour so that you could tell which was the official and which is the unofficial. We encouraged our volunteers to give their own thoughts about the collection, although, yes, with certain boundaries. And we managed, as a result, to get the university as a finalist in the Times Higher Education Award. So, you know, some people supported us. It wasn't all bad. Even collection access was to do with widening participation. And I'm so pleased that Ken and Sam in particular have helped us so much. This was back in 97, okay? I was cataloguing the collection for the first time on a computer. It was like, oh, this is really whizzy, using DOS, discs in and out. And this, by the way, is a slide from a talk that I gave in 2012. I just took it out and put it in. And I was saying in 2012, how wonderful, what have we been doing? And even then, in 97, 98, we were thinking it would be really good if one day in the distant future, we can have all our collection online for people to see. So we were trying to widen access to the collection. Of course, we had no way of doing it with this, but it was always a dream that maybe one day when technology got better, we would be able to do this fantastic thing. And by 2012, we'd actually managed it. The university IT department, by the way, wasn't terribly pleased about it because they were very concerned about firewalls. This was in the early days we said, well, we'll have a standalone computer. There was all sorts of problems. And there were also some opposition from academics, not just in Swansea University, but outside, who said, you're going to put all the collection online, but there'll be mistakes in it. We don't want mistakes. Give Swansea a bad name, won't it? But we wanted that to go out there so that people, if there's mistakes, people can tell us. We can warn them that it is a raw catalogue online, but at least it would give an idea of what we had. This, by the way, I forgot these were on. This is a part of the 2012 talk, so that's a bit about this. We also decided very early on that, as I say, we'd have child volunteers. We'd also have lots of hands-on material, and I do realise, Ken, that I haven't got very many minutes left, so I'll speed up a little bit. We also decided to have things that you could touch in the collection, which in 1998 was a little bit unusual. It's quite common now. Lots of museums do it now. But in 1998, it wasn't normal to let members of the public and children handle the objects. This was what the curators did. And maybe one or two MA students might be allowed and the academics would do it, but not members of the public. But we decided that this was so important that we had to allow other people to do it. For all the reasons about object-centered learning, which I won't go into now, but there's just so much more that people can get from touching the collection. And we wanted to share it with everybody. So we introduced this right from the beginning. Yes, there were sort of a few eyebrows raised. Yeah, that's more of the please touch thing. We also did lots of interdisciplinary stuff as well. The university did encourage this, actually. They seemed to be quite pleased about it. The maths department was more than happy for Wendy to organise events and a display on Egyptian maths. Now, we've got here Professor Truman, who was in the Department of Mathematics. He's no longer at Swansea University. We've got on the far end there, we've got Richard Parkinson, who was then at the British Museum. And then this gentleman here is somebody very, very famous, but I don't know whether anybody can remember his name. Sorry? He's a very famous mathematician. So sorry, I didn't remember. If I'd been a mathematician, I would have known exactly who he was. And they came along, they opened a maths exhibition. We'd organised, Wendy did most of the work on this. We'd organised borrowing part of the Rhine Mathematical Papyrus from the British Museum. We had boards that could be borrowed and put up in schools so the children could do ancient Egyptian mathematics. They were, of course, doing normal mathematics, but saying it's ancient Egyptian mathematics sort of makes it slightly more interesting. And also it's easier for some children to understand for various reasons. Ask Wendy afterwards why, if anybody's interested. We've also, over the years, done talks on flower arranging. We've done art, religion. We were involved in training future medical practitioners at Swansea University in ancient Egyptian attitudes to death. We've taken part in numerous science days and we've collaborated with engineering on various things and even produced a joint paper with them. The list goes on. Yeah, so this was something that was encouraged. We tried to be as interdisciplinary as possible. Why is that blank? Of course, widening participation does end up benefiting academia. It's sort of a virtuous circle. You could say that there should have been no conflict. And indeed, today, I think that's recognised, it's much more encouraged. The benefits of widening participation to potential students, that those students have reached the cataloguing online means that it also reaches academia, because believe it or not, we were quite shocked when we found out that academics in some other universities didn't even know we existed. But once we got the stuff online, at least they knew that we were there. Yes, so over the years, we've heard fewer and fewer phrases that we'd heard in the early years, phrases like you're dumbing down, you're running the kiddie centre, we need a proper Egyptologist here to run a proper museum. That sort of phased out gradually over the years. And I think what happens is a funny old world, isn't it? What you do eventually, it seems a bit rebellious in the beginning and gradually it becomes mainstream. So these are the really how it benefits academia. I wanted to put on this slide because it shows a group of volunteers past and present, and also shows different people working together, different abilities, some with no qualifications, some which went on to do PhDs, people who've been long-term employed, a nurse, etc., different types of people, all working together in the Egypt Centre. And this slide also shows one of the university's students, the lady with the hat on there, Kim Ridalj, who is now a professor in sociolinguistics and head of school at the University of East Anglia. And Kim isn't the only one that went on to other things in academia. We've got Ken, our Ken, sat there. I'm not going to go through. I just wanted to show one slide to give an example. And in case anybody thinks that we didn't do things for students, we did, but I'm not really going to concentrate on that so much now. We did a lot for students. We introduced courses, undergraduate and MA courses, things that were a little bit different, as well as having them volunteer, etc. So we did do things. We tried to get them to come into the museum. Some of them a bit reluctant. I think part of getting the hard to reach into us was also getting sometimes some of the students into us as well. And we did work with different departments. And none of this would have been possible without so many people. And there's so many, I could give you a long list of people I'd like to thank, including the university management for leaving us alone in the early days to get on with it. Yes, I did just say that. And our indefatigable volunteers, our colleagues, including Taliesin staff, the classics department, the medical school, just could go on and on and on and on. But I wanted to give a really special thank you to my colleague Wendy Goodridge, because she was there right at the beginning before we even opened as a volunteer, and also to the absolutely amazing Sybil Crouch. And I think the university, our university, what needs to know more about this woman. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I'm so glad she was my line manager, because she encouraged me to do what I thought was right, and it sometimes wasn't the sort of normal way. But she supported us no end. She's a brilliant woman. The future, I know it won't be exactly how I dreamed. This is our young Ken, by the way. Many years ago, so it's looking past and forward, because he is young Ken. I know the future won't be exactly how I dreamed it was. I hope that the emphasis on widening participation will continue, but that's up to others now. So he is one of the others. And also, I've included this artifact as representing dreams and the future. This is one of the artifacts the museum very recently borrowed from Harrogate, and an artifact which has long fascinated me, really has, I'm not making this up. The famous Anubis mask, I wrote something on it. It also, of course, represents the Egypt Centre logo. I'm so happy that those who've come after me have really allowed him to visit Swansea. I'm pleased about that. Anubis, there he is. So thank you very much, and thank you to Swansea. I did say for leaving us alone, but that was semi real and semi a winking Anubis. Okay, so I don't know. Do you want to ask questions afterwards? Because
we're going to do the questions at the end of the session, so we'll have the other speakers this session, and then we'll do those. So if we just have another 2 minutes to get set up.